Welcome to the show, Goldsquadrongays. It's the podcast where two Star Wars loving gays talk about and review their favorite Star Wars content while also being gay as hell. I'm your host, Bradley Brower.
I'm your other host, Charles Rogers, and I was going to make a brat joke here, but then I realized I'm grossly out of touch with pop culture.
Insert brat joke here.
Insert brat joke here, because Bradley went to the Sweat Tour yesterday as of day of recording.
So much fun.
So much fun.
I had to do my gay civic duty and go to this concert.
Look, I've been to one Troye Sivan concert in my life, and it was pretty fun. But to be clear, I was also pretty drunk. So
Fair enough.
I feel like his music could be well appreciated on several beers.
I think it would have been if I could afford the alcohol at the stadium, because unfortunately everything's like triple the price. So I got like one drink and I got like a double, but I was just like, ugh, it's like not enough, you know what I mean? Like it's always gonna be a light pour anyway. So it's really crazy. Like I think I had like 2 drinks total, and then I went out with my friend Mark, who he's one of the managers at Blake's, and so we were there afterwards because I was like, I'm gonna go out. Like, might as well, right?
You're
like,
I feel like when you watch that show live, I do feel like the reaction is then, I want to go out.
Yeah, I was like, I need to keep this party going. I was like, let me just go out a little bit longer, you know. So.
I am going off the high of all the poppers that were in the room.
Oh my god, it was like you could just whiff and then you get a hit.
Oh, that is crazy. Oh, Lord. Yes, we do have lives outside of this podcast, suffice to say.
Yeah, I do other stuff besides Star Wars.
Exactly. I do other things, like sit at home and play Dragon Age Origins again. And sit at home and read my books. And sit at home and play MMOs. And occasionally, Bradley, I go sit somewhere else and stare at my laptop.
Okay.
I have a very fun and exciting life now in my 30s.
I love that.
And speaking of people who have exciting lives, Bradley, what have we been doing on this podcast for the last couple of weeks while you and I kind of get our heads on straight? Or as straight as we can be.
Right. We've been talking about Star Wars Inquisitors, a Marvel miniseries.
Yes, we have been taking a little break from TV because we're both pretty burnt out on it to talk about the 4-issue recent Inquisitors run. Today we're going to be covering issue 2. Spoilers for the issue. We're going to be very liberal with them. Go read it. It takes 10 minutes to get through. It does not take a lot of time. I promise. Alrighty. This one, I'm going to summarize it real quick for us. It's written by the same guy, Rodney Barnes. The artist is Ramon Rosanas. Color artist, Guru EFX. Letterer, VC's Travis Lanham. And the cover artists are Nick Bradshaw and Niraj Menon. I do want to talk about this cover really fast before I summarize the issue.
Okay.
So the cover to this issue is the 5th brother, and he's facing, it's from the point of view of TENSU RUN, and he's facing down the 5th brother. And the 5th brother's surrounded by like droid parts, and they're like, TENSU RUN is chopping a droid in half, and the Inquisitor looks all cool and badass, and it looks like this epic confrontation. Keep that in mind when we get to the end, where they actually face off in this.
Loves it.
All right, so this issue is called Death Be Not Still. The 5th brother has gone to the planet of Garragon, where he's trying to track down / lure TENSU RUN into a confrontation. Meanwhile, on Mustafar, the Grand Inquisitor and Lord Vader are talking about their evil plans in Vader's badass throne room. On Garragon, the 5th brother trips a trap and fights some droids, realizes TENSU RUN isn't actually there. Then we flash back, and TENSU RUN is having a conversation with Master Ilan, who, as we remember, got fucking murdered in the last issue. They have a conversation about, like, the dark side is the easier way, but don't do that. You need to be committed to your teachings. And then TENSU RUN murders a bunch of people in the present. Then he arrives on Garragon. He has a confrontation with the 5th brother. Some other stuff happens interspersed. They fight. TENSU RUN cuts off his arm in, like, it's a page and a half, this fight. That is it. It's a page and a half. I don't even think the fifth brother throws a single droid at him. It's so quick, but Tensu Run's like, I'm leaving you alive because you need to tell your master that I'm alive. End of issue. There we go. That was me summing up the issue while rolling through it.
I like it.
Bradley, what did you think of this issue?
I didn't realize it until I think I was doing some of our social media stuff ahead of time. It's shorter than last week's episode or issue.
Last week's issue.
Last week's issue. Because
we're so used to talking about TV.
I know. So page number wise, this is a shorter issue. Not as much goes on in this. They squeeze a lot in, but like it's kind of like a quick 1, 2, 3. Like there's really not much going on. I saw this coming only because I feel like I was thinking like, okay, well, if every issue is going to be about another Inquisitor or whatever, it's going to be just like the same thing where it's like, okay, they go, they look for him, something happens, and then it's over. But because this one was just the fifth brother by himself, I thought maybe there'd be a little bit more, but I guess not. He also doesn't really do anything other than I think all he does is just reveal a little bit about the Inquisitorius, or just more of the arrogance, I guess, of the Inquisitorius, of thinking that they're like the best of the best, you know.
He also gets into like his backstory. I will say this, I'll skip ahead to one of my notes because I want to bring this up because I think you raise an interesting point. The last issue, the Grand Inquisitor would not shut the fuck up. This time, the fifth brother does not have a lot of like monologues or even discussions to the audience. Like he does, he'll say a couple of things to us, but compared to the Grand Inquisitor, he's very quiet. Mm-hmm. He does not say a whole lot in his narration, which I found really interesting about him. I liked this issue, not as much as the first one, and I can kind of see the direction. For context, Bradley has read at least issue 3 as of recording this episode. I have not read issue 3 or 4, so I don't know what happens. I can kind of see where this is going, and you can sort of see where TENSU RUN is not going to win this. He's going to get his ass handed to him. And we can kind of see why, but yeah, this one, the fifth brother mainly just sort of waits around on Garrigon after he figures out he's been tricked because he's hunting Tensu and realizes he's not there, and then just sort of Tensu shows up. He's like, okay, cool. So not quite as much as the last one. I think it may be that the fifth brother is not as proactive as the Grand Inquisitor was.
Right. He's definitely a different type. I don't want to say different type of Inquisitor, but I feel like it's also interesting from what we know from Kenobi. Obviously, this is before that, where the fifth brother was vying for the position of Grand Inquisitor after the supposed death of the Grand Inquisitor. So I find it interesting that he's not as proactive when he thinks of himself highly, or thinks of himself as being either just as good as the Grand Inquisitor, if not on his level, which is, I don't know. I just find that now that's obviously using context clues from other material. So
we do not yet have the fifth brother novel to tie this all together.
Of course.
But it's interesting because he sort of walks this line. He has this section later on, I'll just skip ahead to it, where he talks about, there's this scene where he's talking, so he has this like little droid that he's following around / is following him around the whole time. Mm-hmm. And at one point he remarks kind of to the droid and kind of to the audience that his entire purpose is basically to finish Order 66. Like that's what he's been conditioned to do. He does not have much outside of that, which I thought was really interesting, yeah, compared to how we see him in Rebels and how we see him in Obi-Wan Kenobi, which presumably is a little later down the timeline, that he's much more ambitious in those, particularly in Obi-Wan Kenobi, where he's just straight beefing with Reva the whole time over the Grand Inquisitor position. All right, couple of little notes I want to talk about from this as we go through it. I want to talk about the Grand Inquisitor and Vader sequence. I hesitate to call it a scene because it's one page.
Right.
Although I will point out that this page made me fucking insane.
Okay.
And when I tell you why, in fact, pull the page up, Bradley. I'm going to tell you why, and see if you can, see if you can spot what about this made me insane. You give up?
Yeah, I do give up.
It breaks the 180 rule. So when I was reading it on dynamic view, when it scrolls through on a comic, this makes sense. Like, this is fine. Like, if I'm looking at the whole page. When I read it on dynamic view, where it goes panel by panel,
Right.
the Grand Inquisitor flips, like, completely reverses all the way around. Like, he's facing right at the top and then left at the bottom. Like, he and Vader switch places.
Yeah.
It makes me insane to look at. It makes my brain hurt.
Yeah, I guess. Well, because like if this were in like film, obviously, if this scene were happening and this is the way that we're viewing it, that would mean that the camera would be spinning, right? We would be going completely around with the Grand Inquisitor. So we would start on his right.
Because it starts on his right and then behind
then it flips,
him, and then jumps to in front of him and then moves around to his left.
Yeah, that is kind of weird.
Which it has nothing to do with comics writing. The page is fine when I look at the whole page.
Sure.
But as a person who attended multiple years of film classes, reading this on dynamic view hurt my brain, genuinely.
Right.
But I do also want to talk about Vader's line where he says, "Your strategy is sound, Grand Inquisitor. It is why you remain alive." Because that's so different than the Vader that we're used to. I thought of Thrawn when I read that.
It's strange because this is still pretty early, right? Like in the terms of
this has got to be pretty early. Obviously, this is after Fortress Vader has been constructed.
Right.
But it's at least prior to. I would have to look at the next cover comic, but it's at least prior to Jedi Survivor, so it's at least prior to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi has not happened yet.
Right. Yeah, it's so weird trying to figure out all the timeline stuff with this, like, or trying to like figure out when it's supposed to take place. Because when we do get to the next one, you're right. Because you know the video game more than I do.
I know that I'm going to mention the video game later as a joke. But I will say there is a thing that I know about the next comic that clues me into the fact that it happens before Jedi Survivor.
Interesting.
That is all I'm going to say about that, because one day we'll get Bradley set up with the capability to play video games. I still need to play Outlaws. I've heard Outlaws is really good.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it is Dragon Age time. I've been waiting 10 years. Fuck you all. Who would have thought that I would be ignoring Star Wars Outlaws to play Dragon Age? Definitely no one who's ever had a conversation with me ever knows how I am about this series. Anyway, I like this scene, and I think Vader being like, yeah, I mean, you fucked up, but your strategy to redress it is pretty okay, so you get to live. That's so different than the Vader we see in Empire Strikes Back, just going around killing people for looking at him funny.
Yeah, he's given up by that point. I think he's kind of like he's really dialed into the evil. Like he's just kind of like fuck it.
Because he's supreme commander of the Imperial fleet at that point. There's nobody above him except the Emperor.
Yeah. And even then he's already scheming to get rid of the
Emperor.
Even then
he's already scheming, yeah, because the Darth Vader run hasn't happened yet, where he goes to Exegol. That has not happened yet. Let's talk about TENSU RUN.
Okay.
I found this flashback really interesting compared to the TENSU that we meet in issue 1.
Okay.
The one where he's trying so hard to like not be super proactive, where he's like, we're going to stay here and plant the seeds of hope and we're not going to go out. And in this flashback, which cannot be that long ago, like they look basically the same in this. He's like, we need to leave the shadows. And Master Elan is like, no, that's a terrible idea.
Well, it's hard to say when this is taking place because also Master Elan doesn't have you can't really tell, but he doesn't look like he has his robotic leg. So possibly does have one, does not have one. You can't really tell from the panel, but because he's wearing clothes, like all over everything. I don't know. He was more in like a hover wheelchair or something, like in the one panel when we last saw him. So
he was much more infirm when we saw him in the quote unquote present day before he got fucking murdered.
Right. So it's definitely a like I don't know. I don't want to say like a year or two, but like there's some time. I just don't know what it is, but
it's kind of hard to tell. I just found the contrast between like, because we also kind of see this TENSU coming out in the next sequence, where he murders the shit out of the Slothman,
which is so sad. Rest in peace.
R.I.P. to Pelor. This is Slothman.
The Slothman. You were in our. You live in our hearts.
I admit that I did read his panel in the next sequence. I read all of his dialogue in that DMV voice because the last episode.
You're so silly.
I'm ridiculous in my head. Look, I have to find some moments of levity in the crushing hellscape of capitalism.
I just want to bring up the fact that he does straight up murder this guy, though. Like,
he does.
That's not nice. That's not very Jedi-like.
Well, he murders his entire fleet, and then the guy is like, he's sitting here monologuing to himself out loud in the cockpit. Like, well, I better kill all of them, otherwise somebody is gonna know. Like, there's gonna be a witness. Like, he's literally eliminating the witnesses.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because in the previous scene, Master Elan has this great quote that I actually wrote down. Quote, "The dark side, it presents itself as the release to a need," which we then see in the next sequence. The need is to protect the illusion of TENSU RUN, and the release to the need is kill everybody that's trying to kill him.
Right.
R.I.P. Slothman. It is a little unclear. I did have to check, though, but I think he's dead.
I think he's dead, only because of, well, let me look at the panel real quick. Let's see. So because
he electrocutes the whole ship,
right? And it kind of blows apart. But I mean, there's a little smoke coming out of the cockpit of the one, so maybe. But you know what?
Really
anything's possible
hard
in Star Wars.
To tell. Yeah, it's really hard. I will say this, for this particular sequence, it is really quite difficult to tell. I do believe, yes, that is his ship. One of those ships is his ship that's broken up back there.
Yeah.
But we don't ever actually see it explode.
Right.
And so it's a little difficult to tell.
But I'm looking at the designs of the other ships, and they don't look anything like his ship. So I don't know. Yeah,
I was kind of looking for that kind of boxy.
I think that's his.
It's so hard to tell. I mean, a lot of my criticisms of this comic are that sometimes it can be difficult to tell what the fuck is going on.
Yeah.
And that's not just a sense of like, oh, it's a comic, it's a medium I'm not super familiar with. Even when I read it as intended, so not in the dynamic view, even when I read it as intended, it can be very difficult visually to tell what's going on in the comic.
Which is why, again, I think this would have made a better Tales of the Inquisitors. Like, it would have.
Well, we can't all have everything animated, Bradley.
I know, but it's like, just give them more money and just do it. Like...
Yeah, I mean, yes. But also, we gotta have something for the comics.
I want somebody out there who's really like an aspiring animator or whatever to do like these comics as like their pet project. Like, to be like, I'm gonna animate my own, comics. Like, and make
I think there are people that will do like animated versions of these, or I would have to go look, but I'm sure somebody has done like fan versions of these or voiced over them.
That would be
which
so
would
cool.
Be kind of cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, we already kind of touched on at the top, the whole fifth brother sees himself as a tool to perpetrate Order 66 and nothing else, and clearly feels nothing about this. So I want to skip ahead to the planet Targion.
Okay.
Where TENSU RUN's boyfriends are having a conversation. I skipped this in the recap because I knew I was going to talk about it here. It's one page where they're having a conversation that's basically like, damn, he might do something stupid. Well, nothing we could do to stop him.
Yeah, it's like, it's kind of a silly... I honestly don't understand why this panel is here.
I don't know. I don't know if it's setting something up. Like, this dark-haired guy whose name I don't remember is going to go running off after him, and the monk is going to stay here? Like, I don't know what this is setting up. It feels like it's setting up something. I don't know what it's setting up.
It just feels out of place. I mean, in the broader term of the whole entire issue, it's just a random one panel that doesn't match the setting, the rest of it, or the visual styling at all. Like, it's all bright colors. It's like that blue and the wheat field. It just doesn't really add up.
This and the Vader panel are the two worst offenders of just randomly. It almost feels like another page from another comic issue that's been randomly dropped into this one.
Well, the Vader one felt like it was from last issue.
It kind of did, actually. It kind of felt like it should have been at the end of the last issue.
It was like a continuation of the scene from the last issue. Like, so it was just like, why did they just stick it in there? You know, I guess it was I think to make this one longer. I'm telling you, this one's like shorter for some reason, and I don't know why. But I feel like you could have had at least 2 more action panels with their fight that we're getting to.
Yeah, and like, I don't know. It's weird because we also go straight from this scene where Vader's talking to the fifth brother. Like, Vader delivers the opening monologue, which I was a little confused about the first time I read this. But then I reread it and it made sense. Vader is delivering the opening monologue to the fifth brother.
Right.
Where he's, again, being correct that suppressing the Jedi is the only way to keep the Empire in power. And then it cuts to this scene of him talking to the Grand Inquisitor. It's a little clunky.
Yeah.
Like, the content of this comic is good. It's a little clunky in how it's laid out. Anyway, then TENSU RUN and the fifth brother have the most anticlimactic fight I have ever seen in a comics issue. It lasts for 1 page and 1 panel.
Right.
So 1 page and then 1 panel.
It's a little disappointing. Well, especially because the cover was so cool.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a nothing burger. He does chop off the fifth brother's hand, arm.
Yeah.
Which...
How much of these Inquisitors is actual Inquisitor at this point, honestly? Because I feel like from what we know from other issues of other comics and other things, everybody gets their arms and legs cut off constantly.
My reaction was, that's for Grease, you son of a bitch. A statement that does not make sense to Bradley at all, but will make sense to some of our listeners. And then, yeah, TENSU RUN's basically like, I need you to go tell your master that I'm still alive.
And he's like,
because he's going to do stupid Jedi bullshit. It's like the number one thing that stupid Jedi do in this period, which is try to take on Darth Vader. This will not work.
Yeah, I never understood that part of the thought process for any of these people, is that if I take out Vader, then everything will go great for me. Like, yeah, but the problem is you have to take out Vader.
The problem here is you have to take out Vader.
It doesn't make sense. But...
I remember, I think it was a Legends comic where a bunch of Jedi lured Vader into a trap. And it was like a whole bunch of them tried to take him on and he had no lightsaber and he killed all of them. Like, no, do not go after Vader during this time period. Holy shit, he's going to fucking murder you.
Yeah, he's got some rage right now, so he's never going to...
He's at the height of his power.
That's right.
Anyway, that's where this issue ends. And speaking of rage, next week we're doing Inquisitors number 3, which is called Nowhere to Run, but more importantly, the cover says that it is the fury of the 7th and 9th Sisters.
I like it.
I'm real excited for this one. Bradley, do you have any final thoughts on this actually very short issue? I'm kind of impressed we managed to pull 20 minutes out of it.
I like the fifth brother. I really do wish we had gotten a little bit more from him. I think, honestly, that 2 little mini half page of his, like, quote unquote flashback, I don't know if that was enough for me. I almost wish they had done, like, the parts where he's just like walking, you know, like through the place. I don't think we needed to see that. I think that could have had more panels of his backstory. Not that we really need it. I mean, obviously it was like he was in the Jedi Temple and then for some reason he turned. I don't know. They don't really explain it too much, but
we only find out, that he used to be a Jedi.
Right. And we clearly see that he like killed his master or something. So I guess that's pretty badass of him to kill his own master, but I also kind of think it's like, well, but why? Like, we don't have a why. Like, that's why I liked, Iskat Akaris' story, because we got the full novel, we got like her backstory, we got all that stuff. I feel like Fifth Brother needs that. I feel like Seventh Sister needs that. I feel like Ninth Sister needs a little bit more. Like, I feel like we need all that. More Inquisitors backstory.
You just want more Inquisitors. Yeah, I think too, besides the fact that the pacing is very clunky and the organization is very clunky, I do think my number one criticism of this issue as well is going to be, for an issue that purported to be about the fifth brother, we didn't learn anything new about him or his perspective or anything, get to spend any time with him, that would have also been nice. I said last time we don't have to advance the meta plot. This doesn't have to be the fifth brother's backstory issue. The last issue certainly wasn't that for the Grand Inquisitor. But I feel like the time we got to spend with the fifth brother didn't provide any more of an insight into him. Into how he thinks, or why he is the way he is, or why he's so ambitious when it gets to the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, or why he's so entitled, or even just the flavor of entitled that he is. So I think this issue was a fun read, but a huge missed opportunity.
I agree.
All right, and next week we're doing issue number 3.
Loves it.
Hey. Pluggables. Bradley does a bunch of reality TV. You can find it on Bravo and Peacock. And the latest one is The Circle Season 7 on Netflix. I do a TTRPG Star Wars podcast called For Light and Dice. I also write gay thriller mystery novels called Beach House Studios, and you can find those on Amazon Kindle. These are the fastest I have done the promos because these episodes are going to be so short that I don't want to dwell on them. All right. Well, we'll be back next week for more Inquisitors, and Bradley, go ahead and run the socials. Thank you for listening to this episode of Gold Squadron Gays. Did Charles fuck something up? Email us at goldsquadrongays@gmail.com to let us know. You can also find us on Twitter at @GoldSquadGays, and you can find us on TikTok and Instagram at @GoldSquadronGays. You can also find us on YouTube at our Gold Squadron Gays YouTube channel, where we post full episodes of this show. Finally, if you liked the show, don't forget to rate us and give us a review on your favorite podcast platform. That allows other people to find our show. As always, thank you for listening to Gold Squadron Gays, and we'll see you next week.